I am now pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Daniel Mills. Dr. Mills is a practicing veterinary surgeon and academic who specializes in the management of problem behavior and the human-animal bond. He was Europe's first professor of his discipline and has pioneered a scientific transformation of our understanding of companion animal problem behavior through the development of a psychobiological approach to clinical animal behavior assessment. He's also included in Stanford University's 2020 list of the top 2% of scientists in the world. More recently, he's worked extensively on the wider implications of human-animal relationships, including the economic significance of companion animals and health benefits of animal-assisted interventions. He has published around 150 full peer-reviewed scientific articles and more than 50 books and chapters. He runs an audio and YouTube podcast series, What Makes You Click, which features chats with inspirational friends in the field of animal behavior. It's with great honor that I introduce Dr. Daniel Mills.
Hello, my name's Daniel Mills, and I'm Professor of Veterinary Behavioural Medicine at the University of Lincoln. What I'd like to discuss with you today is the approach we've been developing to understanding the impact of pets on human well-being, both the positive and negative impacts. But before I do that, I need to say a little bit about the team that's been behind this initiative. I want to give credit to Professor John Maltby, Drs. Sophie Hall, Nico Kargas and Anna Maria Barcellos, who has been leading most of this work as part of her PhD. I should also give mention to the naturalist Chris Packham, who helped us in particular with the work we've been doing with individuals with autism. In the UK, Chris Packham is a well-known naturalist who suffers from Asperger's. If you look on the internet, you'd be forgiven for thinking that all pets are good for you. But having spent most of my career working with clients with pets with problem behaviours, I can assure you that's not always the case. Indeed, people derive different benefits and different problems associated with different pets and their circumstances. One of the things that I want to convey today is the idea that the benefits that we get from pets are not the product of owning the pet, but rather what we do with the pet. And in particular, as I said, the shared activities that we do together, not just doing things because we are pet owners, although there may be incidental benefits like that as well. One of the ideas that has been around for quite a while is whether or not there is a common pet effect, i.e. a benefit that we get from having pets. And various theories have been put forward in order to try to explain this. For example, the biophilia hypothesis suggests that as humans we have a biological need in order to be with others, and by having pets that need is partly fulfilled, and that brings all sorts of mental health benefits as well. Other ideas have focused around social buffering and support, i.e. the benefits we get just from companionship. This includes ideas that perhaps the bond that we have with pets is particularly important, and attachment may be particularly valuable in that context. Other theories have focused on the role of pets in redirecting our focus, perhaps diverting our attention away from some of the uncertainties in life and helping us to cope as a result. This will include things like uncertainty management theory, which is a more recent idea that has been developed to try to explain the general pet effect. However, others have argued that the general beneficial effect of pets may actually be an illusion, and there may be several reasons for this. One of the most well-known proponents of this idea is Howard Herzog. He suggests a number of factors might lead to the impression that pets are generally good for us. Some of those issues relate to the way that studies are designed. Often the studies investigating the effects of pets on human health and well-being are relatively small and work with quite homogeneous groups, and as a result they're not really representative of the wider population of owners, so the effects are perhaps more limited. A second issue is the assumption that the effect is due to ownership and not characteristics of people acquiring pets. Many of the studies in the field are based on volunteers who clearly are interested in pets and so more likely to report positive effects. And thirdly, there are issues with the actual work that is published. in the scientific literature, it's much easier to publish positive effects than lack of effects. So perhaps there is a skew in the literature in so much as we only see the papers that report where there is an actual effect and not so much the papers where there is no effect. There are of course reports of negative effects of pets as well, but these are much less common. Clearly pets come in many shapes or forms, and these are some of the animals that I've shared my life with, including both my children and my wife. It seems reasonable to suppose that we will engage in a wide range of different activities with different pets, and that they may bring different benefits as a result. But whether or not there is a common pet effect, we still don't know for sure. Clearly, there are many positive benefits from our relationships with pets, but it's important, I think, for us to remember that there are also potential negative effects that we need to be aware of. Pet ownership is not a risk-free activity. What's important is that we manage the risks and maximise the benefits of pet ownership. What I'd like to describe is the results of a series of studies, the first of which was published in Scientific Reports, and this was the work, as I said, of my PhD student, Anna Maria Barcellas. And we've used a similar methodology in order to explore the types of activities that different populations engage with their pets, mainly focusing on dogs, but I'm also going to include cats in this work as well. The first thing we did when we started this work is we stepped back and thought, what do we mean by well-being? From a historical philosophical perspective, well-being has many different forms. When we looked at the literature on human-animal relationships and interactions and its impact on human well-being, it became apparent that much of the work focused on things like how animals impact our feelings, or hedonic state. And one of the traditional branches of well-being relates to that aspect of feelings, or hedonia. We can have positive or negative feelings, and they can be associated with high or low arousal states. So, for example, a high arousal positive state might be laughing a lot and feeling very happy. A high arousal negative state would be feeling angry, whereas a low arousal negative state would be feeling sad and depressed. But a low arousal positive state would be feeling very calm and tranquil in a given situation. One of the things we know from the human psychology literature is our moods change quite rapidly. So when we've been looking at the relationship between pets and our feelings, we may have been focusing on fairly short-lived states that could be affected by when it was we actually asked the questions. A much more stable area of well-being refers to sort of our outlook on life and how happy we feel. And this is what's known as eudaimonia, or eudaimonic states. It's how we see ourselves and how we're doing in the world given our circumstances. So it's a self-perception of how well we are flourishing. And traditionally, there are 6 different domains associated with eudaimonia. Autonomy, the degree of control we feel we have over things. Environmental mastery, our ability to influence the environment around us. Personal growth, our ability to develop. Our relations with others, particularly the positive ones. Our purpose in life, and our acceptance of ourself. These are 6 different domains that make up eudaimonia, and together we might want to say that these contribute to our satisfaction with life. In the work that I'm going to present, we looked at both of these aspects, and as I've indicated, our suspicion is that eudaimonic states might be much more useful for assessing the longer-term impact of pets on our well-being. Remember, those impacts can be both beneficial but also harmful. Research has taken slightly different forms in different studies, but the general principle is the same. We ask people about the sorts of activities they do with their pet, and then ask them about the impact that has on their well-being, giving them prompts on how it might make them feel in a positive or negative way, but also in relation to the 6 domains of eudaimonia that I mentioned in the previous slide. Likewise, we might use those prompts as the basis of the conversation and ask them to give examples of activities that make them respond in that particular way. To date, we've studied 4 populations in this way. We've looked at UK dog owners. We've looked at a population from Brazil, sampled from different regions of Brazil because it's a very diverse country and culture. We've looked at individuals from the UK who suffer from autism, and we've looked at cat owners in the UK. What we do once we've gathered all this information is that we start to sort it according to whether or not we're concerned with the feelings aspect or the eudaimonic aspects of well-being. And in the case of the hedonia, we divide things into positive or negative valence, or into high and low arousal. And each of the quadrants in this diagram indicate a different type of emotion. So for example, the top right quadrant, the yellow quadrant, indicates positive valence state of high arousal, whereas the bottom right indicates positive valence state of low arousal. Likewise, the 2 quadrants to the left indicate negative valence states of either high or low arousal. For the purpose of this illustration, the white indicates states that are actually reduced as a result of a particular activity, and the quadrants are populated with different activities that people described. So what we can see from this is there seem to be no positive valence state, high or low, which are reduced as a result of any of the activities that people described in the interviews. In the case of eudaimonic well-being, we sort the data according to the 6 different areas of eudaimonia. And we record in the same way whether or not that state is increased or decreased as a result, illustrated by the green thumbs up or the red thumbs down in this particular illustration. We also then have this long list of activities that people have done, and these have to be grouped into some meaningful way. As a result of the interviews, we may end up with tens, possibly even hundreds of different specific activities, and we try to reduce this down. We can look at its impact on different aspects of hedonia and eudaimonia, and what we've found across the different populations is we can reduce all the activities down to 8 broad themes. There are some things that are the inevitable features of pet ownership. These would be the sort of things that make up perhaps the pet effect. Regardless of the type of species, etc., just by having a pet, these are the sorts of things that happen. There are certain activities that seem to be centered around the pet's health. So for example, getting veterinary treatment, buying medications, etc., worming the animal, factors like that. The third one refers to shared interactions, things that you do together. The fourth one are educational impacts. Maybe as a result of having a pet, you read up more about that particular breed or species. There are benefits and harms that potentially arise from looking after the pet and the actual caring process outside the sort of general health issues. There are also a group of activities that seem to relate to play. And then there are activities that relate to social interactions with others. So having a pet might impact on the relationships you have with others or how often you encounter certain people. And then there are another group of activities associated with pet ownership that relate to unwanted behaviours and situations. So we can reduce the long list of the specific activities down to these 8 broad themes. And that's what we're going to use as the basis of the rest of this discussion. So let us consider first how the different types of activity, the 8 themes listed at the bottom of this slide, impacted on the feelings or hedonic well-being of pet owners according to their reports. Now, by improved well-being we mean increases in positive effect of high and low arousal or reductions in negative effect of high and low arousal. Likewise, reduced well-being refers to reduced positive feelings or increased negative feelings of high and low arousal. The graphs here simply show how the 8 different types of activities or themes as different segments and reflect how many of those 4 potential changes, increases or decreases in positive or negative feelings, were reflected in that particular activity. What you can see by just looking at these graphs is not all the segments are the same size, and that's because some of the activities were not associated with a change in that aspect of hedonic well-being. And in the next couple of slides, I'll go into this in a bit more detail. If we consider first how pet ownership might improve well-being, the picture on the left, we can see that most of the segments are the same size with one exception. And this is because each of the 8 activities seem to improve well-being or hedonic aspects of well-being using all 4 of the potential mechanisms, i.e. increasing positive affective states of high and low arousal and reducing negative affective states of high and low arousal. The only exception to this was pet health. Pet health could increase positive feelings of high and low arousal and also reduce negative feelings of high arousal, but there was no mention of how pet health issues could actually reduce negative low arousal feelings. Let us now consider the graph on the right, where we think about the impact of pets on reducing well-being. When we consider reduced well-being, we're thinking about how pets might be reducing positive feelings of high or low arousal or increasing negative feelings of high or low arousal. Unlike the improved well-being, what we see here is much more variability associated with the different activities. And also, none of the activities seem to reduce well-being through all 4 reported possible ways when it comes to thinking about their emotional impact. What we also notice is that most of the reduction in well-being associated with our feelings seems to be associated with an increase in negative feelings rather than a reduction in positive feelings. When we look at the data overall, considering all the different types of activities, some interesting patterns emerge. We're going to consider both the impacts that improve well-being and those that reduce well-being. Let's start with the ways in which pets can improve owner well-being, especially in relation to their feelings. One of the things that emerged was that shared interactions were consistently reported to have the potential to increase positive and reduce negative emotions of both high and low arousal for all populations. So from an emotional point of view, it seemed that those shared interactions seemed to have a consistent effect and be affecting the emotions in a positive way through all the possible mechanisms. By contrast, other activities had a much more variable potential impact on owners, depending on the demographics of the owner, i.e. the type of owner we were talking about for a given species, or according to the species owned. So, for example, UK cat and dog owners reported positive effects on low arousal states for all activities, but that was not found for the other populations. With the exception of shared interactions, cat owners did not report a reduction in high arousal negative emotions for any other class of activity identified. And another example, neither Brazilian owners nor owners with autism reported any positive impacts arising from pet health related issues, unlike the UK dog owners or cat owners. Let us now consider the ways in which pet ownership reduces well-being in relation to owners' feelings. What we find here was more consistent reporting of potential negative impacts on hedonic state, especially in relation to increased negative affective states across populations, i.e. it is the occurrence of negative emotions rather than the absence or reduction of positive emotions that seems to be affecting them. One of the things we noted is that owners with autism generally report a wider range of negative impacts, especially in relation to reduced positive emotions. That makes them slightly different to the other populations, and it might be because of other factors relating to their condition. They may be prone to a wider range of other mental health issues. The other thing we found was that the potential for increased negative emotional responses, whether they be of high or low arousal, to rise from the inevitable features of pet ownership, pet health related activities, caring for the pet, shared interactions with the pet, and unwanted behaviours was consistently reported across all demographics. These activities were not reported to reduce positive emotions, with the exception of problem behaviour amongst those owners with autism. So these 5 types of activity, the inevitable features of pet ownership, pet health related activities, caring for the pet, sharing interactions with the pet, and unwanted behaviours, seem to have a marked effect on owners' emotions, particularly by generating negative emotional states rather than reducing positive emotional states. The exception being those people with autism who also seem to generate less positive states when their pet has problem behaviour. Let us now consider how these 8 activity themes impacted on eudaimonic well-being. Just to remind you, there are 6 domains of eudaimonia: autonomy, environmental mastery, personal growth, positive relations with others, purpose in life, and self-acceptance. I hope you can see immediately that the shape of the segments is very much different in this situation. There were generally lots of positive impacts on this aspect of well-being for each activity. Not surprisingly, problem behaviour had few positive impacts across the population. Likewise, health-related activities consistently failed to generate positive outcomes for half of the domains in eudaimonia. It's also not surprising that the 2 group-related activities did not result in an increased sense of autonomy, because by definition they were group activities and not related to the individual's independence. Let's now look at how these activities reduced eudaimonic well-being. Again, negative impacts on this aspect of well-being are much less common than the positive ones, with many activities reporting no impact on a given domain of eudaimonic well-being across the population studied. So the effects are much more variable. When we look across the dataset, we again see some interesting patterns emerge. In relation to improved eudaimonic well-being, we notice that the inevitable features of ownership and shared interactions generally had the potential for widespread increase across the domains of eudaimonia, although cat owners did not report increased autonomy arising from these activities. Personal growth and self-acceptance were the most consistently increased domains of eudaimonia affected, and autonomy was the least consistently affected attribute. But even issues like problem behaviour have the potential to have positive impacts on owner well-being, particularly with regards to their personal growth, and this was identified in particular by cat owners and owners with autism. They perhaps find personal growth in terms of learning more about their animal in order to solve the problem. If we now look at the ways in which eudaimonic well-being was reduced associated with pet ownership, we see the following. Generally, these are less common than the positive impacts. Positive relations with others was most frequently identified as an impact, but it was still only referred to in about a third of the potential contexts. Everybody seemed to recognise the potential for reduction in autonomy associated with pet ownership. If you own a pet, it imposes certain restrictions on your life, regardless of the pet and regardless of who the owner is. And no single theme consistently negatively impacted a given domain of eudaimonia across the population studied. So there wasn't a single factor that we could say that was generally associated with pet ownership. Owners with autism perceived many more issues with problem behaviour, and these owners may need special extra support. Our current ongoing quantitative work, which is building on this, seems to indicate that these impacts are very heavily moderated by the strength of the bond as well. But again, the effect is not uniform, highlighting how complex these issues are. So in summary, what our work found was, first of all, pet ownership and mental health are complex ideas, and simple generalizations about the relationship between the two are probably unwise. We suggest that at its simplest, pet ownership can be divided into 8 broad classes of activity. There are inevitable features of pet ownership, things that arise from just having the pet. There are activities related to the pet's health. There are activities related to shared interactions. There are educational impacts. There are those impacts relating to caring or looking after the pet. There are those that arise from play, those that arise from social interactions with others, and then those impacts that arise from unwanted behaviours or situations. The impacts are highly variable depending on the type of owner and/or pet, although the positive effects of shared interactions on both hedonia and eudaimonia are fairly consistent. And it may be that this, rather than the inevitable features of pet ownership, is at the basis of any pet effect. It's also worth noting that problem behaviour imposes a high emotional and social cost. That social cost seems to be via its impact on positive interactions with others. And these are the areas we need to be mindful of. So what I'd like to say is, it's not so much what you own, but what you do, and especially what you do together, that seems to most consistently impact on our well-being. Pets perhaps meet a wider need for interaction with others. Thank you for your attention.